As the horrors of Nazi Germany spread like wildfire across the European continent, countless lives were thrown into chaos. Among the most vulnerable were Europe's Jewish communities, who were increasingly targeted by a regime that had turned hatred into official policy. Facing escalating persecution, thousands of Jews fled their homes in desperate search of safety. Many believed that Switzerland, a small neutral country tucked safely within the Alps, might offer a last sanctuary. But for many who reached its borders, the reality was far more complicated. Switzerland's response to the refugee crisis would become one of the most contentious chapters in its wartime history, filled with difficult choices, conflicting interests, and lasting moral questions. In the early years of Nazi rule, Switzerland maintained a relatively open border policy, admitting Jewish refugees from Germany and Austria. There was genuine sympathy among portions of the Swiss population, and a recognition that those fleeing Hitler's regime were in grave danger. However, this initial openness began to shift by the mid to late 1930s. As the number of arrivals grew and the geopolitical situation in Europe became increasingly unstable, the Swiss government began to retreat from its humanitarian stance. Economic concerns, national security, and fear of provoking Germany gradually overshadowed the humanitarian impulse. The turning point came in August 1938, in a decision that would stain Switzerland's reputation for decades. In a move that shocked many, Swiss authorities actively requested that Nazi Germany mark the passports of German Jews with a large red J. This measure was not imposed on Switzerland. It was initiated by the Swiss government, eager to stem the tide of Jewish refugees. The red J was designed to allow border guards to instantly identify and turn away Jewish travelers. It was a stark signal that Switzerland no longer wished to carry the burden of being a haven for the persecuted, and it marked a shift from quiet restriction to overt discrimination. By 1942, as news of the Holocaust, the industrial-scale murder of Europe's Jews, began to reach neutral countries, the refugee crisis reached its peak. With deportations and death camps now openly operating, thousands of Jews attempted to cross into Switzerland, often on foot, sometimes guided by smugglers or sympathetic strangers. Many were caught just meters from safety. Swiss border guards, operating under increasingly strict federal orders, were instructed to send back those without proper documentation. The justification was that only political refugees, not racial refugees, were eligible for asylum. This semantic distinction became a death sentence for thousands. Entire families, children, elderly, pregnant women, were turned back at the border and handed over to German authorities. Many of them would be placed on trains to Auschwitz or other extermination camps within days. While some Swiss cantonal governments showed greater leniency, and certain border officials quietly disobeyed orders to help refugees sneak through, the federal stance in Bern remained rigid. For every person granted shelter, many more were pushed back into the jaws of death. Border zones became places of tragedy and tension, where decisions made in minutes had consequences lasting generations. The Swiss government defended its actions by citing national survival. With a small population, limited arable land, and an economy already under strain, officials argued that Switzerland could not sustain a massive influx of refugees without endangering its own stability. There were also deep fears of provoking Nazi Germany. Surrounded on all sides by Axis powers, Switzerland feared that a sudden humanitarian influx could provide Hitler with an excuse to invade. In their eyes, neutrality demanded self-preservation, even if that meant turning away those in need. But neutrality is never just a matter of policy. It is also a test of moral values. Within Switzerland, there were many who disagreed with the federal approach. There were heroic exceptions. In the towns and villages near the border, local residents, clergy, farmers, school teachers took great risks to hide the Jewish refugees or help them across under the cover of darkness. The Swiss Red Cross, while limited in its power, worked tirelessly to aid Jewish communities across Europe. Some Swiss diplomats, notably in Hungary and Romania, issued forged travel documents and protective passports that saved thousands. These acts of individual defiance offered a powerful contrast to the broader policy of exclusion. In these isolated stories of resistance, the conscience of a nation still flickered. The numbers speak volumes. Switzerland accepted approximately 25,000 Jewish refugees during the war, but an estimated 30,000 to 40,000 were refused entry, many of whom were later captured and killed. The difference between life and death often came down to the discretion of a single border official, or the speed with which someone could hide in a forest or scale a fence. It is a haunting arithmetic. Behind every number lies a face, a family, a story that could have been different. After the war, Switzerland faced growing criticism from international human rights organizations, historians, and survivors. The truth about its restrictive policies began to emerge in newspaper reports, diplomatic cables, and testimonies. As Holocaust education spread in the post-war years, Switzerland's role drew fresh scrutiny. In the 1990s, amid a broader reckoning with its wartime history, the Swiss government formally acknowledged that its refugee policy during the Holocaust had been morally indefensible. A public apology followed, along with a government-backed compensation program for Holocaust survivors and their families. Institutions that had once stood by the border were now forced to reckon with their silence. This episode in Swiss history remains deeply painful. It is not a story of clear heroes and villains, but rather of a nation caught in a moral crucible, wrestling with competing instincts of fear and compassion, self-preservation and solidarity. Switzerland, perched between the collapsing democracies of Western Europe and the rising authoritarianism of Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, found itself at a crossroads where every decision carried profound consequences. It was a land of peace at the center of a continent on fire, and maintaining that peace came with a price. Switzerland's neutrality during World War II faced profound challenges. Surrounded by Axis powers, every decision about refugees became a tightrope walk between national survival and moral responsibility. Leaders in Bern emphasized the need to avoid war and maintain economic stability, focusing on non-interference. But this cautious approach had ethical costs. Rejecting Jews fleeing Nazi persecution wasn't just administrative. It was a deeply human decision. Fears of overpopulation, resource strain, or provoking Germany shaped policy. But such fear-based choices risked indifference to human suffering. Thousands were denied entry, and for many, it was a death sentence. Although Switzerland did not actively participate in the Holocaust, its refusal to help had lasting effects. Each person not rescued, each silence maintained, became part of the broader tragedy. These decisions would later haunt national debates and stir calls for reflection. Switzerland's refugee policy raises lasting questions. How should nations balance self-interest with humanity? Can neutrality exist in the face of genocide? And when history demands a response, do we rise or turn away? In the next episode, we explore how a quiet but determined Swiss resistance took shape through the efforts of local citizens, clergy, and officials who defied orders to save lives. From secret crossings to hidden shelters, we uncover how small acts of courage stood against overwhelming fear.